G'day folks, it's Nathan here, or FVR375 through the channel. Today I'm going to do an update video on the overreach within Queensland Weapons Licensing Branch currently and what the likely impacts of that overreach are. So just to go through what I will be talking about today. So I'll talk about what's currently occurring with permits to acquire and the additional questioning / detail that's being sought by Weapons Licensing Branch. I'm then going to talk to the situation in Queensland currently in real terms, in terms of what's happening with the floods that we've all experienced through the vast majority of the state, to be honest, from the far north, Western Queensland, right down into South Queensland. The state's been quite heavily affected by what you would have to call an unprecedented amount of water, and in most cases certainly higher than what was experienced in the 1974 floods. So quite a significant weather event that will have some follow-on impacts, and those impacts being the rise of the feral animal population, particularly pigs, down in those heavily water affected regions. So I'm going to talk to some detail around that and show some footage of what's coming for our farmers in Western Queensland and indeed most of the state to highlight the realities of that. I'm then going to talk a little bit about the LNP government, the fact that they were largely re-elected at the last state election based on the rural and remote area vote, and certainly some of the positive things that they're doing currently in terms of assisting farmers. So it's pretty clear from a Queensland government and a federal government perspective that they're here at the moment to support our primary producers and those affected by the floods, which is great to see and something that Queensland's always been really good at, and there's certainly plenty of that occurring currently. So we'll talk a little bit more to that. And then we're going to go through what support our farmers are going to need, particularly in relation to the feral animal problem moving forwards, which is going to be a downstream effect of this water coming through without any shadow of a doubt. And then we're going to try and understand why there is such a big disconnect with Queensland Weapons Licensing and some of the details there. So the first thing I wanted to cover in this video was the exact context around what is occurring with Queensland Weapons Licensing and particular permits to acquire in Queensland currently. So a couple of weeks ago, or probably a little bit more than that now, we had the issue around additional questions and this idea that there might be a ban in Queensland on large calibre firearms. This was unequivocally proven to be incorrect and inaccurate. And the Police Minister responded pretty quickly by citing that there is no intended change and no change forthcoming in the future either with regards to weapons legislation around larger calibres. So that was good news in itself. However, in the last couple of weeks, what we've started to see from weapons licensing is all permits to acquire around centrefire firearms, and all might be a bit broad, but the vast majority and certainly a significant number of firearms users have responded with detail that this definitely is occurring within Queensland. But there's a significant amount of detail being sought on permits to acquire. So specifically, most are being asked the name of the owner of the Queensland property that they plan to shoot on with the intended firearm, details of the property outlining the size, terrain, locality of said property within Queensland, and details of the population, density and frequency of feral animals that would require the use of this specific firearm on this property. So that's fine. Like, to a point, Queensland Weapons Licensing do need to receive a genuine reason for anything above including but above Category B firearms in Queensland, which is stated in the legislation. But there is never been this level of detail required, and for most firearms users in Queensland, you'd well and truly understand that the licensing process captures all of that information. So if you're going to be conducting recreational shooting, then you'll have to provide detail and authorisations that specifically cite where that is occurring. And obviously similarly with club membership, etc., if you're shooting at a shooting club or are a member of an organisation. So that's all done as a part of your Queensland Weapons licence, so it's in place already. does beg the question of why now we're being asked to do this on the basis of each and every individual firearm and every permit to acquire, and what possible benefit that could have when every single person who's applying for a permit to acquire is already a licensed Queensland weapons licence holder, or firearms licence more accurately, because the term weapons not a particularly accurate term when describing firearms. You know, rifles, etc., are a tool for either the recreational hunter or the person on the land, and that's how they should be discussed. So why all of a sudden this significant overreach? And certainly the advice that's come through from government to date on the matter is that there is, again, no change. So somebody has changed something within Weapons Licensing Branch. There has been a policy shift. This never used to occur in this manner, and now all of a sudden there's this urgent requirement for all this specific information with each permit to acquire. You know, at the end of the day, Weapons Licensing Branch should only be working within Queensland legislation, and the broader bounds of Queensland legislation are designed around two basic concepts with firearms. One is the concept of public safety, and the other is public interest. So public safety, the fact that you are a Queensland firearms licence holder pretty much covers that off. You've had to do the prescribed training. There's been a whole bunch of background checks and police checks on you to confirm your character and capabilities to hold a firearms licence, and that's about where that stops from a public safety point of view. So permits to acquire, going to that level of detail in terms of specific properties when it's already included on your licence, etc., it has no relevance whatsoever. So with that in mind, I just want to talk to the realities of what is going to occur in the next 12 to 18 months with feral animal populations in Queensland, based on the significant weather effects that we've had over the last few months, and generally speaking the 24-25 wet season. So as most of you are aware, I'm a professional pest controller by trade. I complete a number of contracts for government, for corporate industry, in the mining space, etc., etc. So I get to see a pretty significant amount of Queensland in terms of the work that I conduct. And I'm also very familiar with the cycles of animals and how they move across the landscape based on seasonal impact, etc., etc. So we've just had flooding in Queensland that is larger in most cases than what has occurred in the previous largest flood, which was back in 1974. So it's a really significant weather event. And what that means, generally speaking, is that we're going to go into a boom cycle for our feral animal populations, and indeed most populations. So most of the natives are going to do quite well too. But as with anything in nature, there's boom and there's bust cycles. So when you've had a big heap of rain, there's about to be a whole lot of vegetation, food, and obviously water all over the place, which will enhance the ability of animals to spread, breed, etc., etc. We are going to see a massive increase in feral animal population in the next 12 to 18 months in Queensland, and it's going to be a lot quicker than that. You know, when you look at a feral pig population, for example, which I would suggest is going to be one of the key issues moving forwards, you have each sow, so mature sow, 3 to 4 months old potentially, and on a good year she can drop 8 to 10 suckers, so piglets, twice a year. So if you count a little bit of mortality in there, you're still looking at 15 to 20 pigs per sow per year. And if you've got mobs out there already established, you don't have to be a rocket scientist to figure out that the feral pig population is going to absolutely explode in Queensland, and in particular Western Queensland, where they've had the bulk of this water in the next little while. So that's important to talk about, because there's only really 3 ways you can control a feral animal population. And they're all fairly costly, but here's what it is. So you can either bait the population using poison baits, and that has a limited degree of effect depending which species you're talking about. and it can be completely ineffective in many scenarios based on the terrain type and other food options out there for those feral animal species. You have trapping operations, which a little bit similar to baiting, can be effective, but are often not effective, particularly on a cycle that we're about to experience where there's a lot of food source out there, so it's pretty hard to attract those animals into trap sites so they can be effectively trapped. The third methodology you have for controlling feral animal populations is shooting, whether that be ground-based shooting using normal optics, thermal, etc., or would that be aerial shooting. And you know, within that whole shooting space, you basically will have primary producers conducting shooting to control pests on their land, as they are obliged to do under the Biosecurity Act 2014. You'll have recreational hunters out there assisting landholders to control feral pests, which is excellent, and so they're enjoying their sport. They're out in the field doing what they like to do, but they're providing a significant benefit to primary producers and people on the land who are experiencing enhanced feral animal populations. And then you have professional contractors like myself who are also working in the space. Now on top of that, you'll have various government agencies who are doing their piece as well. I guess the key point about all of that is that 2 out of 3 of those feral animal control techniques require firearms and effective firearms for the job at hand. Now, the best way of controlling any feral animal population is integrated methodology. So it's doing all of those things to achieve an effect where that's suitable, feasible, cost effective, etc., etc. The net effect of what I'm really saying is that if you go restricting people's access to firearms, making it more difficult in Queensland for that to occur, particularly with your recreational shooters, what you're going to see is that those people are going to be less effective in supporting our land management and conservation needs in Queensland, particularly after a flood year like this, where we're going to have a significantly enhanced feral animal population. And indeed, we're going to watch this problem explode with no way of solving it. So one does have to ask the question of how Queensland Weapons Licensing have managed to become so unaligned with the Queensland government approach. So the Queensland government approach currently is there's a bunch of politicians out visiting Western Queensland. We have a bunch of ministers and the Premier out there moving around, looking at the problem, providing funding, leaning forward to do what they can to assist people in their time of need. And that's been really good to see, and it's been a pretty good response all around. But then you have one government department who are responsible for one of the key issues being access to firearms and regulation of firearms. Key issues in terms of ongoing feral animal management are completely unaligned with that and are causing issues by restricting access, making it harder, not allowing people access to the tools that they need to effectively manage the land, to reduce feral animal impacts, and to assist our primary producers and agriculturalists moving forward after what has been a pretty tough year. So that's a pretty key question, and you know, certainly if I was in Queensland State Government currently, I would probably be asking why and what they're up to, because it doesn't make sense in terms of the overarching Queensland Government approach, particularly with relation to this year. So I guess to round this out, you know, my question is, you know, why are we seeing these added questions and this added restriction on the flow and the process with Queensland Weapons Licensing, particularly given the very clear and unequivocal response from the Queensland Police Minister recently, where he highlighted there have been no legislative changes and there are no planned legislative changes in terms of the Weapons Act in Queensland. Just really doesn't make sense, their approach, and it makes even less sense when you consider that current context that I just talked about in terms of the feral animal problems that we have inbound in Queensland. You know, and that's not theorising, that's not a best guess. That is absolutely what happens when you have a massive flood cycle come through. You drench the land, we're going to have a massive explosion of vegetation and cover, water source and food, and those feral animal populations are going to boom. And as I talked about earlier, the only way to deal with those feral animal populations is by one of 3 methods: 2 out of 3 require firearms, and arguably the third is not overall a very effective strategy in terms of removing those populations. So by restricting access or making things more difficult for Queensland's recreational shooters, professionals and primary producers, you're actually causing a much bigger problem in Queensland, which the state government has shown that they, in recent years, are not well enough funded to solve from a government perspective, and they certainly do need the help of landholders and those helping landholders to get those issues under control with feral animals. And not only that, those landholders are obliged by law. It's not an option for them. They are required under the Biosecurity Act to control pests on their property. Be that a small number or a large number, but as I've said a number of times here, it's going to be a large number moving forwards for the next 12 to 18 months in particular. So, look, I've got the deepest respect for Queensland Police as an organisation. I think they do a great job and are under-resourced in many respects. But I do have to ask the question of why this particular department within Queensland Police are being obstructionist and are causing issues moving forwards. Just as a note, some of the footage that I've put up during this video in various clips, it's all my footage from all over Queensland, a fair bit of it out in Gulf country, some of it down south. But again, these are not beating up a bunch of hype around what might happen with feral animals in the future. There are a number of biosecurity concerns in Queensland currently, and an exploding feral animal population is not good news for anyone in terms of cost of living, in terms of damage to the environment, and in terms of damage to land and landholders, and potentially some of these other issues that don't get talked about enough, such as disease vectors and biosecurity risk in that respect. So that's pretty much where we're at. Feel free to leave any comments you'd like down below. What does it mean if you're a Queensland recreational shooter and you've been asked for additional detail on your PTA? Unfortunately, at the moment, you're just going to have to respond, but make sure you do that in a well-considered way. If you've got a firearms license in Queensland, you've already got those questions answered. It's a no-brainer. So just put down the details that you've put down previously. At the end of the day, you're not dealing with firearms experts in Queensland weapons licensing. They're public servants, and they don't necessarily have the full experience of understanding the land or ballistics, etc. So help them understand by putting in that relevant amount of detail to make sure that your permit to acquire gets through, and we'll see where this issue progresses over the next couple of weeks and moving forwards. Hopefully, I would like to see this increased pressure from weapons licensing be taken away, and we get back to a sensible position that doesn't waste people's time in terms of dealing with the pretty simple matter of permits to acquire. Anyway, thanks for watching, and as I said, feel free to chuck any comments you'd like down below.